Good afternoon and welcome to the session on reimagining the ICT regulation within the fourth industrial revolution era. In this session, we will be having conversation with three regulatory authorities that have a say in terms of the regulation of the ICT sector, or perhaps maybe more generally now known as a digital ecosystem. So I will first introduce myself. I'm Ntsibane Ntlatlapa. I'm the Impact Area Manager within the CSIR system here. The impact area that I lead is named Network Systems and Applications. We cover mostly the networking area, but we also deal with the support to the regulatory systems as well as the policy issues around the fourth industrial revolution. And I have in the panel three representatives of the regulatory authorities. And I'll start in the order in which that I start. That's how they will be coming on after I have done my own presentation. We have on the panel the Deputy Commissioner Hardin Ratshisusu from the Competition Commission. He will then come on after I have completed my presentation. We then have a member of the Information Regulator, Sizwe, Snail, Mtuze, who will also give us his take on the information regulator's perspective. The final one would be Councillor Zimri from ICASA. He then also will be sharing that. So the process today will be that I will start my introduction to basically give us a context for this conversation, which will then be followed by 5 minutes presentations of those regulatory authorities. After that, I'll ask a few questions, and then in the process, the audience is given an opportunity to ask the questions. You can write the questions on the website. The team that I'm working with here will read them for me. For the regulators to respond. I think at this particular time we can maybe move to the introductory slides. So as we start, so basically, what I just want to highlight is that the purpose here of this slide is just basically to highlight the context for this and why we will be talking about the evolution of the regulatory landscape within the digital ecosystem. What I have done in here is that mostly the research that went into this come out of the publications of the ITU, several publications of the ITU, and a little bit here and there from the World Economic Forum. We have also used some sources from CANI, which used to be known as AT CANI. We then also have the Presidential Commission inputs into that. So basically, there is some work that we did at the CSIR with the Parliamentary Research Unit on the internet governance, which have also the relationship with what we will be discussing today. There's a little bit of delay here. Okay. Just maybe as a background, and as I said, we will basically be looking at the Presidential Commission at some point. The Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution has recently just released its report, and in a sense has given us the definition that we should actually be working on whenever we talk about the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I hope that everyone, whenever we say that, they will be focusing on that. And first of all, it does talk about that it's an era where people, and I think I want to highlight that, that the people are using the smart, connected and converged, both cyber, physical and biological systems. And then business models, smart business models. So it in a sense goes beyond just the issues of the technology into saying the technologies are not just in one sphere, it's in all those three spheres, but it's also affecting the business systems, and the business systems would actually impact on us as citizens, make sure that we can get the benefits out of that. So as you look at it, you would find that the digital ecosystem plays a very important part, as in most of the changes in technological revolution. The previous revolution is very important. So the digital ecosystem plays a very important part in terms of the overall issue of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So we will focus on that, having understood that it's not the end of it. There are others. So as we look at that, and the question for us is now start to look at how do we look at the issue of the evolution of the regulations, right? We are currently working on the ICT regulations, but what are the factors that are then affecting us as we move to the full digital ecosystem, where we at times start to talk about what we call the data-driven economy. So the applications as they go well beyond the ICT space. They affect many other spaces. So in that manner, how do we then regulate when the digital transformation is in every sector? As an example, how do you regulate the aerospace sector when the digital ecosystem is part of that, and you have the autonomous, aeroplanes? It's a different type of regulation that we need to look at. So in all of that, you would find that in some cases, technologies such as the Internet of Things would probably, you would see them as the technologies that fit well within what we have as ICT regulations. But actually technologies such as blockchain and others, they don't necessarily fit in there, and who actually regulates that particular aspect. So this is, in a sense, saying the regulation as we know it of the ICT, it's in evolution. So how do we respond to that? We knowing that we are producing a lot of data, and this data is produced in every facet of our life. With all of these technologies coming on board. So I just want to highlight the issues that you see on this slide there, and everything that we have, and most of the emerging technologies that we are talking about are around the data. So you'd look at what is it that we call big data. It's when you are combining data sets from many different areas, and you have a lot of data that you have to process to make sense of it. But then you also have the IoTs, which actually contribute to collecting that data. The blockchain, understanding the transactions that goes in there, the cloud being where you store the data, and AI being where you learn from that data. So everything surrounds the data. So the data becomes a central component of most of these other technologies. Now, when you would hear when one talks about the fourth industrial revolution that will talk about drones and will talk about other technologies which in a sense benefit from these foundational technologies that we have on this particular slide that work on the data. So it's when you embed the intelligence that you understand from these technologies, you embed them into other technologies such as if you embed them in cars, you can have autonomous driving cars. You embed them in planes, you can have autonomous planes. You can embed them in robots. You have some thinking robots that can be able to run those issues by themselves. So a common denominator in all of that is that you have data protection. So how do you deal with that, with protecting of data, especially where you might be dealing with personal data? We have just gone through, we are actually in the middle of the pandemic. The data that can be collected in that, there's a lot of data that can be collected that is personal data, but that can give us a lot of intelligence in terms of how do we actually deal with this pandemic. So how do we deal with that personal data? How do we protect the personal data in such a way that we can still have societal benefits? So having come to that, I want to just touch the areas where we are already knowing, already conversant with how we are regulating. So if you look at the internet value chain, for instance, within the internet value chain, you already know that you go all the way from the content that you have to different types of technologies that we have, both the connectivity solutions as well as the background, supporting technologies. And you have the user interfaces that you're going to use. It goes in a cyclic way. But where do these technologies fit? And the technologies there, as we said, that they are around the data. So there's a lot of data that you connect around that. We know that some of the biggest tech companies in the world rely exclusively on the data that they connect. The Googles, the Amazons, they are big companies that actually monetize that particular data. So this is within the whole internet value chain. And we must take cognizance of the benefits that we can get from that, having also understood that that data, we also need, there's a protection element to it. So the internet value chain also is evolving as a result of that. So there are many issues that we need to highlight, and reading from one of the sources that I used, they would highlight that in this particular case you have IoT, which is subject of ICT, but the others are more applications. And a good example is that cryptocurrencies, while they use blockchain technology, the cryptocurrency as a sector gets regulated by the central banks. But actually that doesn't mean that blockchain as a technology is regulated by those regulators. It's not even also regulated by the ICT. So this may call for a different thinking around how we regulate. There could be a thinking of amalgamation of regulations, but perhaps maybe the better way is the collaboration amongst the regulators and looking at how that can be achieved. Now, when you look at the studies, both from the ITU as well as from the World Economic Forum, they tend to agree that as we move forward, the regulation can be basically achieved more in an agile manner, where we are looking at the pace of technology and make sure that the regulation covers the pace of technology, as well as the collaboration between different regulators. This also includes the collaboration between the regulatory system as well as the policy system with the innovators in the industry, how those collaborations could be put together. So a slide that I'm showing here just is a highlight that comes from the ITU, which basically indicates the areas in which we can have the collaborations where the ICT regulators come in. We know that in some parts of the world, you still have a separate broadcasting regulator, a separate spectrum regulator, a separate ICT regulator. We have those as one in South Africa, but there are different other regulators. Today here we have a data protection regulator. We also have the regulator that deals with the competition in the system. So how do we actually get those to work together for the industry to benefit? So as I get to the end of this presentation, I just want to highlight that what you will have here is I've just done the context. You will then have a few presentations by the regulators. I may have mixed up my order here. The first regulator that I had actually said will start would be from the information regulator, and the member of the regulator there is Advocate Sizwe Snail Mtuze. He will be closely followed by Deputy Commissioner Hardin Ratshisusu from the Competition Commission, and that session will be wrapped up by Councillor Zimri from ICASA. We can go ahead and you can start to load your presentations and go in that order. So as he's loading the presentation, let me just read that Sizwe Snail Mtuze is a senior at the Snail attorneys at law and a member of the South African Information Regulator. And just to highlight that he's here representing the Information Regulator. He's also an international coordinator of the African Center for Cyber Law and Crime Prevention based in Kampala, Uganda. His activities are not just limited to the legal system. He was a member of the ICT review panel for the Department of Telecommunications and Postal Services, serving as the chair of the e-commerce committee, which is now renamed as a digital society within the new committees. He also served on the National Cybersecurity Advisory Council of the DTPS. So I would just highlight that he should come on. He holds LLB from the University of Pretoria with tax law and cyber law electives, and also LLM from the University of South Africa. So you can come on. Okay, we are ready for you. You can see something there. Yeah, you can start to do the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm Sizwe Snail Mtuze from the Information Regulator, as you heard. I'll be chatting to you about protection of personal information. Obviously, I can't talk about it for the whole day, but basically just to advise you who's the information regulator and why the information regulator is so important in this ICT regulatory space.
We seem to have a little bit of a glitch there. Sizwe, can you perhaps still hear us? I see your slides have moved away from there. It's gone. Okay. It looks like there was a technology glitch here that we have lost Sizwe. We will contact him and then reload his presentation. But in the meantime, can I ask Hardin to load his presentation, and maybe we can then swap the order with then having Competition Commission starting before. So as Hardin is loading, yeah, we can hear you. You are going to load the slides. As you are loading the slides there and sharing your screen, just briefly, Hardin Ratshisusu is Deputy Commissioner of the Competition Commission, which is appointed by the Minister of Economic Development. Prior to that, he held various senior roles at the Competition Commission and in private sector. In his role as a Deputy Commissioner, he is responsible for oversight over the Commission investigative and enforcement activities. He also actively participates in international fora, such as the OECD, BRICS, UN Commission for Trade, as well as ACF, that I don't know what it means, and has also occasionally published papers in recognized academic journals. He holds a BCom honors in economics from University of Venda, masters in commerce in economics as well from the University of Witwatersrand, as well as the masters in business leadership from the University of South Africa. You can come on.
Okay, so thank you, Ntsibane, for that warm introduction. I have been able to catch your presentation, though the sound was not great, but the issues you have raised, issues that I will touch upon from a regulatory point of view. And indeed, in keeping with the theme of the conference, is touching life through innovation. I will start by looking at the competition regulation in the digital ecosystem, what has been the development. The global economy is undergoing a major transformation. The rapid take-up of technologies, including mobile communication, digital platforms, big data, cloud computing, and social media are changing the nature of products and services and the way in which people interact. The fourth industrial revolution is enabled by digital and physical technology with almost limitless applicability and huge implications for the economy and society. Rapid change and digitization forces enabling the industrial revolution hold promise as powerful new growth drivers. The features of the digital market call for a different and more nuanced approach to competition policy. Hence, the competition commission's digital strategy, which we published, and it's out for public comment. The Competition Commission has also signed MOUs with other regulators such as the ICASA, National Consumer Commission, and NERSA, because all of these do form part of our ecosystem, and we have MOUs with other global competition regulators. What has been happening in the competition regulation sphere? Digital markets have become the focus of many jurisdictions. The EU with Germany and France in the main, UK, Kenya, South Africa, Australia, and many others. We have had global organizations such as the OECD, UNCTAD, and ICN, who've been leading discussions on competition regulation on these issues. Europe has led competition enforcement of digital platforms in the main. We have had cases against Google that you probably are quite familiar with. There are also measures that are currently in place where they've put up some remedies, but these remedies, of course, undergo a public consultation process. We have had recently, as yesterday, they issued a decision against Amazon on how it manages its marketplace and how it favors its own sort of products vis-a-vis those of other participants in the market. So we do have those, and there are ongoing other cases I've seen on Amazon also relating to logistics and delivery services. But what is it that we are doing as South Africa? Because as the Commission, we believe that it's a contestable digital space for local firms to take part in. And to preserve this, the Commission intends to map the local digital landscape in order to inform proactive initiations on market conduct by dominant firms, and to look into future market inquiry or research into specific digital markets. We also are looking at proactively investigating a dominant online firm that may engage in conduct that's exclusionary or even entrench their dominance. We do have, of course, ongoing investigations involving local marketplace companies as well as delivery services. We also would be looking to issuing guidelines where appropriate. And we will institute scoping studies, impact studies, and market inquiries, as I've said. What this means is that we want to learn, of course, these developments, but at the same time, we have to respond. You have seen what's happening in other jurisdictions. I've mentioned Europe. This is where, at the same time, they learn, but they've been actively enforcing where the law has to be enforced. So this is the balance we have to create. We have to ensure that there's cooperation and coordination with other competition agencies and domestic regulators. You have already pointed to this, and it's quite important that we build this. We will also be advocating for pro-competitive as well as pro-challenger regulatory response. What we've picked up here is that as these markets grow, we have to ensure that they remain open and accessible to SMMEs, especially in South Africa, as well as challenger firms. There is a huge risk that if left unchecked, these firms would be so big that we will not be able to regulate them. And I think already there is a challenge at a global level, you can see, especially for the large firms. But in South Africa as well, we do have companies that are growing that we have to watch in this space. We think moving into the future, what ought to be our priorities? I think you have already, touched on the, issues around us working closely with the regulators. We believe the markets have to be a priority, so we'll prioritize digital markets. We'll strengthen cooperation between domestic regulators. So here, I'm talking about, I think, collectively, Competition Commission ourselves, ICASA, National Consumer Commission, and the Information Regulator. We have to join hands and work together. I think these issues of interplay between privacy, competition, regulations of platforms is something that we will keep us engaged as these regulators. We have to work together again in targeted advocacy to ensure that digital markets are a policy priority. There are a lot of initiatives in South Africa, which is quite encouraging, but we have to ensure that our messages are aligned in whatever we advocate for. We have to regulate for inclusive participation in digital markets, especially SMEs and challenger firms, as I've said. This is the opportunity for us in South Africa, especially if we want to promote SMMEs and ensure that they benefit through this platform. We have to ensure markets promote competition, innovation, and growth. And it's good that we are before the CSIR, where we, you are the Center for Innovation for South Africa, that when we do this, we must always think markets, because if we don't intervene early on in this market, we will unfortunately have outcomes such that our markets will be dominated by very few firms. We will not see any dynamism. We may not even see the emergence of new challenger firms in this space. So we see a huge role for ourselves as the Competition Commission in this space. So this is just my brief introduction to the topic and how we see it from the Competition Commission perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. We will maybe just ride along. Let me just confirm whether Sizwe is back online. Sizwe, you can continue. I have already introduced Sizwe, so he will just ride on and highlight the areas from the information regulator. We can already see from the comments that have come from the Competition Commission that in their view, this is already a space which requires working with others. And I'm glad to hear that there's already plans to enable that. Okay. Yeah, the presentation will be coming on. You can start to talk to it as it loads.
All right. Do you have me back?
Yes, we have you back. You can continue.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry for the interruption that we had earlier on. Technology has been failing us, but I'm glad to be back. So I was still explaining to you exactly who or what is the information regulator, and what it is that we do in terms of data. In other words, data, access to data, and prohibition and regulation of personal information data. In other words, on the one side, we encourage access to information that you may require in terms of the Constitution or to enforce the constitutional rights. And then on the other hand, we have the data protection provisions where we say that not all data can just be accessed, not all data can just be shared. Data that belongs to individuals, that must be protected in terms of the POPIA. You would have noted that from the 1st of July 2020, the entire POPIA now has commenced, save for sections 110 and sections 114, which deal with the transfer of the function of access to information to the information regulator. Everything else pertaining to data protection in the POPIA now is subject to a 12-month grace period, which is a grace period to comply, not a grace period not to comply. In other words, it's a grace period allowing people to get their house in order. Now, just quickly, because time is rare, we differentiate between data subjects, people to whom the information belongs to. Responsible parties would be individuals, institutions that process personal information, and operators are those who process personal information on behalf of others. The importance of that is because personal information, as long as it relates to an identifiable living natural person or an existing juristic person, must be protected in terms of the 8 principles. The examples that you see there is information relating to your race, your gender, pregnancy, marital status, ethnicity, color, mental health, sexual orientation, conscience, and belief. We also have a category called special information. I don't want to go into that. I just want to give you the 8 principles because I think that's what we have time for. The 1 principle says you must be accountable to the data subject whose personal information that you use. There's also a prohibition on lawful processing. In other words, if it's not for a lawful purpose, that would be prohibited. Minimality also means that you only take as much personal information as you need that is adequate and relative and not excessive. And most importantly, you must always collect the data from the data subject. So the days of being bombarded by marketeers on your phone are long gone. Like I said, if you do give your personal information, it must be used for a specific purpose. And in terms of condition 4, it cannot just be further processed. So if I walk into the bank and I give my information to get a loan, I mustn't walk out of there having 5 insurances calling me on my phone, offering me policies, because the bank should not give it further. Information quality, I think, is straightforward, complete, accurate, and not misleading information. Openness, which means that you must notify me if you're going to contact me. And most importantly, for the 4th Industrial Revolution, is the processing of personal information with appropriate safety guards, ensuring the integrity and the confidentiality of the personal information. This is also mirrored in your ISO 29000 standard that deals with information security. In other words, you must ensure that the security measures are sufficient organizational and technical measures. In the event of a breach, the data subjects must be notified. You've heard of a spate of the data breaches. Maybe you were affected by some of them. You've seen the role that the regulator has been playing in the public. And lastly, data subject participation. The information may be deleted, corrected, updated on the request of the data subject. I think I'll leave it there. In terms of my contribution here, it's a bit limited, but that is now the new legal standard for protecting personal information.
Okay, thanks, Sizwe. I think that was very informative. Let me just ask Councillor Zimri to start loading his presentation. As he's loading his presentation, I will just read his biography. He's currently serving as a councillor at ICASA, where his responsibilities include, among others, spectrum resource management, standards and type approvals, and number resources. Peter has more than 20 years of cross-functional telecommunications, ICT, broadcasting, and policy industry experience, which includes corporate governance, public sector, international and local policy and regulatory development, as well as compliance and enforcement competencies. He championed regulatory matters as part of several South African delegations, among various other standards and ICT industry bodies. Zimri served on the boards of the South African Space Council for South African Council for Space Affairs, Number Portability Company, as well as the South African Communications Forum. He also served on various standard development technical committees of SABS. Zimri is a member of the Institute of Directors South Africa. He holds master's degree, master's in management in the field of ICT policy and regulations from the University of Witwatersrand. Zimri, you can start sharing and looking into the slides. I see the slides are already up, and you can resume as they are going into the presentation mode. Is he still loading? Okay, it looks like it went.
Can I go ahead, colleagues?
Yeah, you can go ahead. You have the floor.
Okay, great. Sorry. Thank you very much, Ntsibane, for that introduction. I couldn't hear a word what you said earlier on, but thank you very much. It looks like it was a brief introduction to myself. And I just also want to stand on all protocol that was observed earlier on in the introduction and also on your presentation. I just also want to thank our colleagues from the regulators, other regulators, Competition Commission and the Information Regulator for this esteemed panel. From ICASA side, from the authority side, we just also want to congratulate the CSIR for the 75 years of innovative contribution in South Africa. Also, I just want to apologize on behalf of our chairperson that he could not make it for this session, but I think I just relay that message to you. Let me just quickly, I'm going to skip possibly the few slides. Just on this slide, I just want to give sort of a sense of ICASA's mandate. We do have a constitutional mandate, and we basically ICASA is established under Section 192 of the Constitution, and we are regarded as a Chapter 9 institution, as an independent communications authority. Our organizational mandate, we draw that from the ICASA Act, and if you can see below that, we do have the various statutes that we sort of rely on. We also have various policy mandates in terms of the National Development Plan, not to mention everything that's there. We also have the SA Connect, and the various policy documents that have been published by our policymaker, that is the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. The next slide is basically, I think, like each and every other government department, we do have a strategic alignment with government priority outcomes in terms of inclusive economic growth, outcomes 4, economic infrastructure, outcome 6, outcome 12, empowerment and inclusive citizenship, and outcome 14, social cohesion and common national identity, and basically all the issues that are listed below that. We also do, basically, if you can look at our strategic focus, our vision is an inclusive digital society, and I think which is very topical in terms of our discussion today. And then obviously we do have a mission statement and the various organizational values in terms of innovation, results-driven, collaboration, accountability, and stakeholder-centric. I think basically from ICASA's point of view, possibly the issues that we are engaged on in terms of this digital ecosystem. I think our colleague from the Competition Commission also referred to what they're doing on their side. From ICASA side, we are looking at the cost to communicate. Obviously, it's something that might deter the uptake of digital systems and so on from our citizens, and then we have to look at these cost to communicate programs and to identify interventions that we need to do. We also do not only just those issues that we look at the data side. I think from a consumer protection side, our colleague from the information regulator that mentioned that earlier on is that we have to look at our number resource management. And as our colleagues, I think ZA, Domain Name Authority, they are seized with a mandate to look at internet numbers and so on, and domain names. We have to look at the broader perspective in numbers for machine-to-machine type of communications, and also in terms of premium-rated services to protect our consumers, to ensure that they are not negatively affected. In terms of the issues that's very topical on number portability, we have to look at our number porting process. I think this is something that we will hopefully finalize in this year to ensure that our consumers and customers are not negatively affected by the porting process, and also the stolen identity in some respects. We also have to look at barriers to entry in this communication sector in terms of standards and equipment introduction in the market. As the colleagues know, that we are consumers of electronic devices and equipment, and we not necessarily manufacture many devices in South Africa. So I think for us we basically had to look at how do we remove these barriers of importing electronic communications devices into the country, and make sure that the turnaround on type approval and standards development is much more smoother. The big topic, I think, which is very topical, and I think I just need to put a disclaimer that in terms of our licensing process, I won't be able to respond to any one of those questions if it comes up in terms of licensing. We are currently seized with a very comprehensive broadband licensing process, and I think the colleagues would understand that our sector is very interesting and very litigious to a large extent. But as an authority, we did introduce some regulatory measures in terms of light licensing regime, in terms of the V and E band, that is your 60 gigahertz spectrum, and your 71 and 88 gigahertz spectrum. We are also looking at other Wi-Fi bands that's already been introduced, and new Wi-Fi bands to ensure that our citizens can connect and communicate with each other. Well, we also participate in various international, regional, and local fora, where we look at harmonizing band plans, channel plans, and to ensure that we enjoy the economies of scale that comes with harmonization of these band plans and also looking at other issues such as cross-border roaming and those type of things. In terms of what we've done as a regulator, as ICASA, we could not sit back and wait for the 5G developments to happen. And based on that, ICASA established a 5G forum, which we did establish about 5 working streams that's led by industry. So the streams that we established, which is policy and regulation, spectrum, standards, use cases, and obviously the research and development. And as the colleagues can recall, and as we last year at the World Radio Conference 2019, we identified, or the ITU identified millimeter wave bands for deployment, and we identified about 17.25 gigahertz of spectrum, which will be available quite soon for licensing and also for introduction of 5G services in South Africa. If I can maybe briefly just on an indication on the collaboration amongst regulators. I think our colleagues also alluded to this. In terms of the competition commission, we do have concurrent jurisdiction on competition matters in the ICT sector. We also do have a very good collaboration with the CSIR on dynamic spectrum access, and the CSIR is at the moment hosting our geolocation spectrum database. The National Consumer Commission, obviously, we do have an MOU with them to deal with ICT complaints from consumers. The information regulator, we are in the process of also establishing that good relationship in terms of cybersecurity. The Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, there is the South African Bureau of Standards developing ICT standards, and also the National Regulator for Compulsory Standards. From the Department of Science and Innovation, we do have a joint regulatory responsibility in terms of the square kilometer array that is hosted in South Africa, in the Northern Cape. So we do have a responsibility to sort of regulate and enforce the rules that's set up by these institutions. Then in terms of the Department of Health, we do have also a joint responsibility in terms of electromagnetic radiation and exposure limits to electronic communications. We also look at other recognized industry bodies such as SABRI, that is the banking sector, the South African Communications Forum, ISPA, your internet service providers, and also the wireless community. There are various others in terms of postal, broadcasting, and so on that we also interact with quite often. So I think I will leave it there, and I think we'll possibly then respond to any questions that might come our way and so on. But unfortunately, like I said earlier on, I can't hear the CSIR colleagues when they speak. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. This is a live session. We are running out of the allocated time. If you do have questions, please keep posting them. We will coordinate with the regulators here to respond to them. We will unfortunately not be able to take them at this particular point. I had a few questions that I wanted to pose to the team. I would, however, just highlight them, and then we can follow up in terms of the way forward in that. And I can see from all the presentations here that one of the questions that I was going to ask around the collaboration has already been answered. And in fact, there's already the processes of establishing the formal methods of collaboration. The next point was to say, how do we then make it work in a faster manner? Yes, we can have an MOU to enable the collaboration. How do you put it together such that we can be able to now enable faster processing. And one of the ways in which has seemed to be working very well in the fintech world when you introduce the technology in the financial sector is the creation of what they call regulatory sandboxes. Now, the regulatory sandboxes would say that is what would be provided as a scheme to set up a competent authority that provides entities with opportunity to test innovative products and services or business models. And this is to test them prior to promulgating new regulations. So the things that may happen before the regulations come in. So I would follow up with all of you to understand the issues of whether the current regulations that you're operating under enable such creation of such a scheme to be able to test the new things that are coming onto the market. And if the regulations don't currently allow that, what is the process of enabling that? So that the MOUs that have been signed could in fact perhaps maybe enable a creation of a system that can enable testing of the innovative products early and not necessarily wait for other countries to introduce them and infiltrate our market. And as you can see, everybody here is working on assisting the local market, especially the challengers and the SMME market. With that, unfortunately, we did not have a chance to get you to respond to that, but I'll follow up on that. I will close the panel with thanking you for availing your time, and also those who have logged in, thank you for their participation. We will look forward to your questions and we will respond to them accordingly. Thank you.